Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to have one of my dear friends, real life friends, Joël Malm. Joel, thank you so much for being here today. Repeat offender. Love to have you back on the pod.
Yeah, man. It's always fun to talk. We've already been talking.
We were talking for like 20 minutes. I was like, I better hit record or else we're never going to get there. So tell everybody what you're doing that I'm so excited about that brought you back here on the podcast.
Yeah, well, the other day I posted a song I've been working on. Last year, I felt like the Lord told me to get back into music. The last time I did music was 15 years ago when I was a worship leader and I got unceremoniously booted out of a church when a new pastor came in. And so I was like, I'm not going to do music. And that's when I started writing books. It was literally, actually, here's a crazy story. The Sunday where he offered my job to somebody else was the Sunday I got my first agent signed me.
For a book?
Yep.
Wow.
And he didn't like that I was gone to a writer's conference on a Palm Sunday leading up to Easter. So, I mean, that was part of it. But bottom line, I was unceremoniously removed from worship leading. I was like, I guess worship leading is my thing. God must have something else for me. So I haven't touched a guitar in like 15 years. Growing up, I thought I wanted to be a musician. So anyway, last year I literally just one day I was like, you know what? I'm going to write some songs. And I started writing and my wife, who's pretty honest, she's like, those are good. I was like, are you just saying that to make me feel better? And she's like, no, they're actually really good. So I was like, okay. So I started sharing them with some other people and they're like, those are really good.
So and listen, you texted me the song and I don't mean this in any kind of offensive way, but I was surprised how good it is. Like I've known you for a couple years now and I've never had you in that singer-songwriter vibe, right? Like, but I was surprised it was really good.
Well, thank you. The funny thing, it's kind of funny. I did a podcast interview with my high school I went to, and I kind of panicked when they pulled out my yearbook. And they're like, hey, we want to see what in your yearbook you said you wanted to do, what you've actually done. And they pulled up all this stuff. And interesting enough, some of it I've actually done. I was like, I wanted to be a DJ. And I was like, I guess we didn't have podcasts back then. So I guess I sort of am am I a DJ because I'm a podcast guy? I don't know. And then one of the things was be a professional musician. I was like, I let that go. I did that. I was a professional drummer for a while, professional guitar player. But anyways, the thing that I found, I got bored. I literally did find myself getting bored with music. But now that I'm writing, I realize the reason I was bored back then was because I was singing other people's stuff. And I like the creative element of writing my own stuff. And that's where it kind of came back around. And I don't know, we're about to see first song releases February 11th. And then I've got 3 more that we're going to slowly release. So the whole world is so different now. It used to be like get an album and then go on a tour. Now it's like with Spotify, you do one song at a time, and then it's very interesting how the whole thing has changed.
I'm curious because I think that there are a lot of leaders who are listening right now who were told either they weren't good at something or they weren't good enough to be paid at something, or they're wrestling with that self-doubt that comes from rejection or just different seasons of your life, right? Like how, as you prepare to release these songs into the world, how do you mentally, emotionally, and spiritually prepare yourself for that vulnerability?
Yeah, that's a great question, because first of all, any creative work you do, you're always going to feel like you're always going to wonder, am I not enough or is the work not enough? Because nothing is ever quite what you want it to be. Even this song that's coming out, this first song that's coming out, there's like one part of it that I'm like, it's not quite right. And we just can't seem to get it because of my own personal limitations. Like the beautiful thing about music now is they have this thing called auto-tune. So even guys like me can sound decent, but they can fix your vocal. But you're always kind of questioning that. And so, you just get ready. You're going to get criticism. That's the thing. I heard somebody say, though, I've never been criticized by somebody doing less than me, or doing more. Somebody doing more than me, excuse me. And I was like, that's interesting. Are they, as my dad always says that, consider the source. is the person that's criticizing you, first of all, do you know anything about them? And second of all, maybe they had the dream die inside of them and that's why they're criticizing you, right? Because they see you actually tried it. So when it comes to artistic stuff, I've found that with everything I do. I'm reading a great book right now by Rick Rubin called The Creative Act. Great book. And he talks about that. He's like, it's just a constant, you're kind of constantly dealing with self-doubt, but the people that can't get over that never actually produce art.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are some of the coping mechanisms that you have for the hard days?
Well, I don't know because my music hasn't failed yet, but I've had other projects fail.
Well, I know that, but I mean like creatively, right? Like I was thinking more abstractly than just.
Oh, music. Okay. I was like, I'll know in about 2 weeks if the music fails. I'll let you know then. But
no,
yeah.
I mean, but like you've done a lot, right? You've done speaking, you've done writing,
yeah.
You've led expeditions, you've done all of these things, right? And certainly there are times where the message hits or doesn't hit in the way that you want it to, or like, and yet I think a lot of leaders really struggle with the idea of like, man, I failed. Now what?
Yeah. Okay. So I have a very large opinion on that. We could spend the whole podcast talking about that. The more I do this, the more I go, I don't think anything is a failure unless it causes you to stop. So there's a great book. It's called, it's a boring book. So I'm going to summarize it for you. It's called Young Geniuses and Old Masters. And it's basically the life cycles of creativity. And this guy Gallinson, he basically looks at these pieces of art that have been perceived as the greatest works of art of all time. And he found there are two kinds of artists in the world. There are conceptuals, and then, what's the other word he calls them? Anyways, there's the people that come upon like a stroke of genius and they create it early in their career, and they're always trying to live up to that. But he said the greatest works of art that we see, the greatest pieces of stuff, like just art that we value, were created by people who if you look at their work, you see earlier iterations of what they were trying to do. But like, for example, the Mona Lisa, if you do spectrograph stuff on it, I guess it's called spectrograph, layers below it, you see what he tried to do. Oh, wow. And he kept working on it and working on it and working on it and working on it. And what we landed on as the greatest piece of art, the Mona Lisa ever, was actually layers and layers and layers of him trying to get it right and then not getting it right. And they even wonder if he still didn't feel like it was perfectly right where it was. But his basic premise in the book is there are most people, their greatest work comes later in life because they've done a bunch of trial and error. Oh, wow. So it's not failure if it's leading to where you are now. In fact, I was digging through some of my old files on my computer the other day, and I found this concept I'd come up with, and I was like, oh, it ultimately emerged into a book called Connecting the Dots. But I had this earlier concept of it that I was like, oh, wait, I got the idea here. I wrote this little book and it didn't do very well. And then I wrote another book and it didn't do very well. But anyways, it's out there. So
wait, which one didn't do very well?
My favorite book of all the books I've written, Connecting the Dots, it didn't do very well.
I thought that was a great book. That was the book that you and I met.
Yeah, it's my favorite book of the ones that I've written. But okay, whatever. So that's the other thing. You got to create. Here's the other thing I've realized with the hard days is you have to do what you feel called to do for its own sake and just trust the outcome to God. If you can't do that, if you're counting on some sort of quantifiable victory, you're going to be perpetually disappointed because, first of all, I think our frame of thinking is usually too short. So all that to say, on the hard days, I have to remind myself, well, there's clearly something I'm learning here that's preparing me for future things. So it's only failure if it causes me to stop, which is interesting because with the music, I had stopped, and now here I am back doing the music again, and we'll see how it goes. I also have realized I was debating whether to even put the music out there on Spotify and iTunes and stuff, and I'm like, you know what? It's not complete if I haven't done that.
Oh, if you don't ship it.
Yeah. So it's like, I did this for my own sake. Well, this is where I think the Christian faith is such an odd thing. The older I get, the more I'm like, the only thing you get to present to God at the end of life is yourself. So the greatest thing you can do is unlock all the potential that he placed in you, which I think is the greatest work, Ephesians 2:8-10. grace you're saved through faith, not of yourself. It's a gift of God, might not be works, so that nobody can boast. For we as workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which the Father prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. This journey of unleashing kind of everything that he's put in us, I don't think it's complete unless it's for others.
Yeah.
So it's this weird thing because it sounds selfish, like I have to become all I'm made to be, but by you doing that, it becomes a gift to others in some way. So it's the yes and also. It's not selfish to want to become all God made you to be and do all they put in you. And a lot of times that creative urge we have within us, for me, it was music again. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do the music. All right, I did it. But if you don't put it out there for others, it really is. I guess that maybe makes it more a little self-centered. It's just, I have to do this for me. And I think that's the lie of the world a lot, is do it for you. I'm like, and when you do it for you to become all that God made you to be, it ultimately becomes a gift to those around you, because that's the message to those around you. But it's a subtle shift in difference if you're doing it for yourself or if you're doing it to help others. And so, I don't know. We'll see. With music, with writing, I've seen the fruits of that. I don't know how music works, so we'll find out.
Sure. I'm curious about the creative process. Like, I would love to kind of dive into that a little bit, because you're a writer and you put out a lot of great books, and the writing process is long and it's, very comparable. A lot of people use the metaphor of like, oh, it's like delivering a baby into the world. What's the creative process like for you when it comes to writing these songs?
Well, what I vowed to do is just every morning write a song. So I
are you just
that.
doing the whole song like in one shot?
Yeah, I don't always get through one, but like the first 3 that are released, I sat down and wrote those in one shot. Now, I've heard a lot of people talking about this, and they're like, how long did it take you to write that song? 47 years. So it's because, you've got all this stuff that's been building up, these experiences. And so then you're able to, in theory, and writing has helped me. The writing of the books has helped me be able to articulate a little better. It's a different challenge now. But so for me, it's just, for songwriting, it's consistency. In book writing, I'm more of a, most of my books, I would wake up at 2 a.m. with a really clear thought. And I've learned you just jump out of bed and you get on the computer and you write all night if you have to. So some people don't do that. Some people are a little more consistent. When I'm in the editing phase, what I do is I go and drop my daughter off at school, come to the office here and work 3 hours straight. But when it comes to the creative element of it, you kind of have to go when the iron's hot, I think. But there's also an element of consistency. You just show up, right? You show up and you do the podcast, and who knows what's going to emerge from it. This may be the worst episode you've ever done with Joël Malm, or you never know what'll happen. But you still have to show up, right?
You got to show up, and you have to ship it either way, right? Like, I think that's one of the things that I'm always learning, is that my judgment of what's good or bad is limited by my own self-thoughts, right? And so part of the reason why we need community or the body of Christ is because we need the body of Christ to be like, well, that's interesting, or that's not interesting, or that thought is not real, or that thought is real, or like it was like I'm trying to, corporate theology is essentially a little bit of it.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of you do public speaking too. So for me, like the most ironic thing is when I feel like I've bombed the worst on a talk is when most people come up to me and be like, dude, that really spoke to me. And I'm like, but then when sometimes I feel like I do my best, like I'm like, this message was dead on. Crickets, like no response, deadpan. So you have to remember you're not your audience. Right. And that's a really challenging thing for people, is you're not your audience. So you literally don't know what's going to hit. You were talking about that podcast episode that you shared that, people really liked it, right? So, but I bet there's probably other episodes that you go, 100%. Why has this one taken? My dad and I have one called How to Be Mature. It's our most listened to podcast by thousands and thousands. I don't know what took off on that. Some episode called How to Be Mature is it dwarfs all of our other episodes. After we recorded it, I remember turning off the records thing and going to my dad. I'm like, we didn't really answer anything, did we? And he's like, no, no. So
I say it all the time. I have no idea how this works. I just don't. Right.
Yep.
And I actually think that kind of posture in leadership and in creativity is the best way to be reminded that Christ is the ultimate creator.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's just like, as long as, if I feel like I know how it works, then it really does give no reason for the Lord to be in the equation at all.
And you just never know what he's going to bless, which is why you just cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days it will return. As King Solomon says, all right, here's my next offering. Here's my next offering. Here's my next offering. And then who knows, man?
One of the things I love about your work is that, and you said it before we hit record, is that you're always spinning like 10 plates. And it's so good for my ADD brain, because one of the things I struggle with is this identity piece that comes from work, right? And we know that, like, there's a strong tie for a lot of the leaders who are listening between, like, oh, I'm a banker, or I'm a real estate agent, or I'm a hairdresser or an engineer. And so when you create music like this, then do you go around and say, am I a musician, or am I, you're already shaking your head for this.
No,
right?
I don't.
How do you deal with the identity piece and your work piece?
Yeah, dude, that is my wife's least favorite question is, what does your husband do? Because she has no clue what I do.
Do you remember that scene from Hitch? I'm a consultant. Nobody
yeah,
knows.
that's what you
Nobody
say.
knows what that means. That's
And
why I
as
get
soon
to
as
charge a
they
lot.
Okay, yeah. I don't, I've got real estate piece. We've got Airbnb business. I write books. I speak. I lead outdoor expeditions. Haven't done it in a while, but I lead every year a few outdoor expeditions. I've got the music piece. I actually sat down at the beginning of this year and I was like, okay, I do this exercise with all of my executive people I coach and stuff on kind of figuring out your values and figuring out what's the order of those values and what are you willing to sacrifice for those values, right? So I've been doing that for years, and I was like, I need to sit down and do that with myself again, because I haven't done it for about 5 years. And I wrote down, I'm like, my core values are still the same, but one of the things that I realized is super important to me is creativity and growth are a huge set of values for me, which is why I turned down a very lucrative offer a few years ago. I mean, I'd have been set. But I realized it was a wear the suit gig. Here, wear this gorilla suit and we'll make you famous. And I remembered there was going to be no creativity. And I remember instinctively, I was like, I'm going to sell my soul for this fame or whatever. And I remember saying no. And look, it was a great organization. I just knew for my personality type, it wouldn't work. And I realized that while I was writing it down the other day, I was like, oh, it's because the creativity piece is so important to me, and perpetual growth is so important to me, which I could have grown in that role, but there was no room for creativity. And I realized that I really had to focus. It's got to be one of my core values, and I've got to make sure that in everything I'm doing, there's creativity. So when we built when I built the retreat center, it was literally 16 acres of raw land on the top of a hill. And I stupidly thought I knew what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. I got into it over my head and nearly killed me, but we did it, right? So we've got Airbnbs now. And so I'm learning that business, and I'm learning how the music business works now. It's really interesting, but it's growth. And I love the growth part of it because it's constantly humbling to me. I'm an Enneagram 8, right? And we're all about the growth. And so, even today, right before we were on the call, I got an email from the people that are distributing music, and they're like, okay, now you got to go set up your iTunes artist thing. And I'm like, oh, I got to learn a new one. So got to go along. So I do Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, and I'm having to learn all these new, every platform has a different way you upload all your stuff. So I'm learning. But when I look at it as growth, I'm like, oh, this is fun. So.
Let me ask you this, because I think there are a lot of people who are like, I want to grow, but I'm also scared of the pain, and I'm also scared of it not being fun, right? So it's like a lot of growth doesn't feel like it's fun in the midst of it, but it feels much better when it's over. Like I always say, I never regret a workout when it's over.
Yeah.
Right? How do you come to a place where growth looks more like fun and less like agony?
That is my goal this year, actually. I was just talking to a mentor of mine the other day, and he's like, I give you permission to enjoy this. Because I take everything so seriously. this weight of, I want to please God with my life. And I've realized that I don't enjoy the process in the process. And so I'm trying to get better at that this year. So I'll check back with me in a year and I'll let you know, because I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how do you find the fun in it? Sure. And I think a lot of it is, you just have to lower the stakes. I think for those of us that are high output type A folks, the stakes are so high for us. It's like, I have to achieve, I have to do this, I have to accomplish all God's called me to do. And we make everything we do like, this is what's going to define me. And I think in some ways you just need to lower the stakes and go, this probably isn't going to define me. I got more in me than just this. But I mean, I felt that way after I wrote my first book. I'm like, how could I ever do this again? And then 8 books later, I've got my system, I got my thing, and I'm like, I'm not going to run out of stuff to say. After you write your first book, you're like, here's everything I know. It's all right here. But you're not going to run out of stuff. And especially if you're seeking growth, you're not going to run out of stuff. So I think the key is, well, again, it's fixing our eyes on what's ahead, right? Jesus has said, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising its shame, and now he's seated at the right hand of God the Father. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, that you may not grow weary and lose heart. It says that in Hebrews. It's the idea that, he knew he had to go through the cross. And again, that's what we'll go super deep here, but the only things that'll transform you are an experience of great love or an experience of great suffering. So if you truly want to be transformed, you just got to get used to it. That's the process. Great love or great suffering. That's how Paul says we rejoice in our suffering, for we know that suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces hope. Hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who's been given to us. So that's how he can say those ridiculous things, because in some way he understood that the pain means it's working.
The pain means it's working. Speaking of transformation and growth, I was thinking about this when I was prepping for our call today. When I first met you, there were 2 things that you said that really struck me. One, you were recording a podcast with your dad because you wanted to capture his wisdom, which now you're over 200 episodes in, you're killing it. Strongly recommend you subscribe to the podcast. 2 was that you stopped doing what you thought what you used to do, leading expeditions, so that you could be home to be with your daughter.
Yeah.
Right. And so there were 2 things that were kind of a driving force in your life. And this is now several years ago. One is your being with your daughter, and 2 is being with your dad. And so I'm curious, 2 years or so, maybe even 3 removed from our first interview together, what have you learned about being with your daughter and being with your dad?
What have I learned?
What have you learned either about yourself or about the relationship or about relationships in general, or like what's, if we were kind of do like a Jim Collins used the term cold autopsy on that decision, right? So if we were going to do a cold autopsy on the decision to sacrifice expeditions and to put out 200 episodes, what would you say is the result?
I've been learning. Well, for one, the process of learning how to it's not even interviewing what I'm doing with my dad. It's kind of interviewing. I guess it is kind of, but learning that process has been invaluable, because I've had some doors open up recently that have been based on my ability to really listen. But I think the key is that, and actually that's what I really think is the answer there. I think the most important thing I've learned is pay attention. Pay attention, and which encompasses listening, looking, and that's one of the things with my daughter. Like I've just, as I've been observing her, I can tell when something's not quite right with her, and she'll ignore it, and I'll talk about it, and but I've learned to just. I think love is the work of attention. It's just paying attention to what's going on with the other person, and so. Dad and I grew up with the guy, so 47 years in, I kind of can read him pretty well. But with my daughter, that's a whole other.
How old is she now?
She's 9.
Yeah, you're in it.
Yeah, and we're already getting the hormones and emotions. I can tell, like meltdowns and. So
You said something just then that I don't want to gloss over, that love is the work of attention. Drill down on that for me.
I mean, we pay attention to what's important to us. You know, if you want to know what somebody values, look at what they do, not what they say or think or feel. So, you know, you say you value your kids, but you're never around to pay attention to what's going on with them. So maybe you don't, right? Or maybe things have just gotten out of order and you need to realign your priorities. So I think attention is, I mean, it's the natural thing. Like when, for example, I had not paid attention to music for years, and now I'm doing this music again, and now I'm listening to things. I'm like, how did they get that effect on that vocal? How did he do this? And there's only so much you can pay attention to, right? Because we're so limited in our capacities, and we've got everything screaming for our attention in this world. I mean, that's what that's their job, is to get your attention. And everything is, I think, screaming so much for it that to truly be able to give your best time, basically your best resources to those that are most important is the greatest work I think you can do in this very distracted, overwhelming, you know, crisis after crisis. Everything's a crisis. Everything's unprecedented these days. Well, this is unprecedented. Whatever. Just once everything's unprecedented, then it's not unprecedented anymore. So you just have to learn to stay laser focused on those priorities and give them your attention. Like music, you know, now that I'm back at it, my mind is automatically thinking again in terms of lyrics. We were driving to church the other day, and my daughter said something about this light up on a hill, and she's like, "You can't see what's there, but you can see the light." And I had this thought, sometimes all you can do is light up the fog around you, refract the misty air so those lost out in the distance will see there's hope out there. It's a great lyric.
That's a great lyric.
Yeah.
Did you write it down?
I did. It's a song. It's now a song called Fog. But that was literally, I was listening to what she said, and I was like, that's interesting that what she said there. And so now that I'm paying attention to the music piece, everything kind of channels into that. So
did you have to create a discipline around music that you didn't have before?
Well, yeah. I mean, so honestly, I just want to write lyrics. I don't really want to perform. So what I do is every day I try and write one song, and it's kind of part of my devotional time. Writing, I've discovered writing is prayer for me. I just can't pray the way I used to. And I've tried to, you know, the bold, declarative, God, you know, pray. I just can't do it anymore. What works for me all the time, when I can't figure out what I'm feeling about something, I sit down and I write, and it's like the Lord kind of explains to me what I need to know through the writing. I don't ever declare that I'm divinely inspired, but I think there's something in that communication element where he's helping me understand his heart in something. So it's a different format now with the writing, but I use it as my devotional time now. So I'll read my Bible, I'll read a book, and then I'll write a song. So
that's beautiful. I'm wondering if you could talk to the person who maybe gave up on an old love, like a creative outlet, kind of that old thing that they used to do. What message would you have for them in light of your recent rediscovery of what was?
Pay attention.
That's the theme for this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about that, like some of the decisions you're making this year, and I said, how did you know it was time to do it? And basically what I heard you say is I paid attention to the signs. Like things started lining up, and you just go, all right. And you're never going to get, I'm convinced in life when you get about 60% certainty, you need to pull the trigger, because I never get more than about 60% certainty on anything lately. So you try it. So for me, like, it was funny because I did this thing called the Berkman. It was a personality thing. It's not even a personality thing. It's kind of figuring out what is the strengths that you bring to the table and what would be your best careers.
The Berkman, huh?
Berkman.
Never heard of it.
It's this long test. I did it. A friend of mine did it for me, and it's crazy, man. I came out on the top. I got 100 out of 100 on music, and then I got like 95 out of 100 on teaching, and then I got like 92 out of 100 on writing, and then outdoors. So all of the things that were below the music, I was like, oh, I'm doing those. But it just kind of made me think, music is still, even after 15 years of not doing it, somehow this test evaluated that music is important to me. And I thought it was an interesting observation. So that was the first thing I paid attention. I was like, music. And then I pulled my guitar out the other day last year, and I started playing it. And then I realized, I was talking to a friend of mine, a kid that I had actually raised up in our worship team. He's now playing music in Nashville. He's on these Christian music tours. And I was like, could you ever produce something for me? He's like, yeah, send it over to me. So I started recording some stuff, shoot it over to him. He'd send back these amazing arrangements. I'm like, so this is a new world where I could literally be here in Texas, him in Nashville. And I just started doing that. And there's another project I'm working on too that the music's probably going to come into too, but I don't know. I stumbled into that one. That was not, that's going to be a further outcropping of a further result of kind of just paying attention to what was already in front of me, I think.
Well, so like there's a relationship between paying attention and being open.
Yes, openness to experience. Yeah, very important.
Right, because at the end of the day, you can pay attention, but if you decide that you're going to put boundaries around what you do or don't do, like if you weren't willing to say, I'm willing to get back into, I'm willing to pull it off, right? Like your openness, you know, and I think fear is one of those things that quells openness, right? Like if I'm scared, I can't be open, or, you know, that whole, we see that relationally all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so one of the kind of things I've learned in counseling is when people say either what's the point or I don't know what I want to do, those are both signs of fear. My voice in my head is, what's the point? So you make some songs, you get a couple downloads, what's the point? And that's where I really believe you have to get back to sometimes you can't, sometimes the internal motivation isn't there and you have to go with an external motivation. But for me, I think I constantly have to go back to the point. If this is something I feel called to, is it disobedience if I don't do it?
Wow.
And then the other element is you just have no clue what can come of it. I mean, we don't know what comes of a seed that you're going to plant in the ground with this. So you just never know what's going to come of it. And I may record a bunch of songs. I may put an album out there by the end of the year, and nothing comes of it. But I did what I was told. So, and it's been pretty interesting learning the stuff in the process. So
it's so good. It's so good. Okay. I have one more question for you, but before I ask it, I know the podcast families kind of want to connect with you, pick up your music. Where is the best place to get all things?
Yeah. So the music will be on all of them. Spotify, Apple. It's already, Apple, Amazon, all the places that have music, it'll be there. All my other stuff, you can go to joelmalm.com, JOELMALM.com. I'm also on Instagram, Joel R. Malm, M-A-L-M, JOELRMALM. And then on Facebook. I was on TikTok, but I changed phones. I changed phones the day after they shut off TikTok. And when I transferred all the stuff over, they're like, oh, you can't transfer TikTok over. So I've lost access to TikTok. So if that gets resolved, we'll see. I might be back on TikTok soon. But
did you like the platform?
Oh, it's amazing.
I'm not on it.
Yeah, it's far superior in IMHO, in my humble opinion, when you're posting videos with music to Instagram. It's just a lot more intuitive, and the way they mix the music and everything. I prefer it, but but I'm not on there anymore.
That's great. Okay, last question I'm going to ask you. You know, I normally love to ask a piece of advice question, but since you've already done that for me twice, I'm going to go a completely different direction here.
Okay.
I'm going to ask this. 2 years from now, what are we celebrating about what God has done with your music?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'd love to have a lot of people listen to it and it'd be inspiring to people. But I don't know. I don't really have, again, this is kind of one of those things where I'm like, I'm going to do this because I've learned that you do the act of obedience and then you trust God with the outcome. So I guess the greatest thing would be, I mean, I'd love to have a lot of people download the music, no doubt. But what I'd love to also do is it opens up doors to write for other people. That's what I'd really love to do. So,
all right. Well, you heard it here, podcast fam. When you pray for him, pray that it opens up doors.
Yeah, there you go. Opens doors.
Opens doors.
Another, like we were talking about, you always keep 10 plates spinning. It's another plate that to keep spinning, I guess.
Joel, I'm always so thankful for your friendship and for your time and the willingness to chat with you, dude. You know, you're one of my favorites.
Same, bro. I'm proud of you for all. Man, you're going for it. I'm impressed.
Thanks.
The podcast is great.